welcome to the Speculative Podcast. This is Joe. I'm here with James. Going to do something different this time around. We're going to be taking a break from the Expanse series, and we're just going to talk about. We may be doing this regularly, just like random subjects matter. The podcast is called Speculative Podcast, named after the large encompassing genre speculative fiction, which actually includes fantasy, science fiction, and horror, and any combination in between. So I figured I was going to start with subgenres of fantasy, just to show what this gigantic speculative fiction, this giant literary genre covers, as far as the different combinations. So we can start with fantasy. And obviously, a lot of people don't know. There's like high fantasy and low fantasy. These are large genres as well, but you know the difference, right?
You can make this as large as you want by being as nitpicky as you want. Or as small as you want by not being nitpicky.
What do you mean?
You can come up with reasons on the fly for why something is different and must be its own subgenre. And what may have originally been 2 genres is now 15.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Well, I mean, like I said, I'm interested. Like, these are the current ones that they have listed, so I'm interested to hear your take on it. I'm trying to get to it, but yeah,
No.
obviously high fantasy and low.
No clue. I've never read any high fantasy or any low fantasy. Dresden and Tolkien are the same thing.
Okay, all right. So then you know the differences then. So, but yeah. So I mean, that was the main differences before. I mean, they're going to be in there as well, but so this is all the ones they have listed here.
The first one is stupid.
What?
Bangzine fantasy. It's just fantasy. Suck a dick. That's fantasy. I don't care. Interactions with famous historical figures in the afterlife. No. So you talk to a ghost. Still sounds like fantasy. Maybe you could get it into horror. But does it need to be its own subgenre? Fuck no. No. No.
I honestly, to be honest with you, I never even heard of that one before.
Me either. This is the first time I'm seeing it. And
well, that's why I was curious
so
of your.
Dumb to be its own genre.
That's why I was curious about your reactions to that, because like,
could we get more unnecessary?
Some of those buckle up as we go through these.
Fair. That's fair.
But yeah, so
I'm sure I'm going to trigger people here.
So Bangsian fantasy interactions with famous historical figures in the afterlife, and it's, I guess, specifically in the afterlife. And I guess we can click on here and you can see some, I guess, examples of it. Houseboat on the Styx, Pursuit of a Houseboat.
No, never heard of it.
Mr. Munchausen.
I've heard of that one.
What Dreams May Come by Richard Matheson, which was recently a movie done well, not recently.
It's a drug-fueled, I wouldn't call it nightmare. Some aspects of it are nightmarish. But guess what? Doesn't need its own genre.
Well, he does meet historical figures in the afterlife.
Cool!
And it was the Robin Williams movie, but it wasn't recent.
I know what it is.
Interestingly enough, Richard Matheson is also the guy that wrote I Am Legend.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, those guys were all dead. So that's, I'm sure one of them was a historical figure before they died. So, same fucking genre.
Alright, so comic fantasy is next.
Also doesn't need to be a
humorous
a
in tone. It's humorous in tone.
Cool. So it's just a combination of fantasy and humor?
Comedy, yeah.
Oh, man. So anything that happens that we mix comedy with now is its own subgenre. We have to take it away from the greater collective and say, well, you made this funny, so put it over here instead.
Well, I mean, Lord of the Rings has its funny moments, whether those are intentional or not. Like cooking mushrooms when they're trying to hide. And put it out, you fools! The only thing, I mean, I don't see it on here, but the only thing that comes to mind I hear is, what's that guy that people always rave about? Discworld.
Do you know his name? I gave you his last name. Would you know?
Yeah. Pratchett, right? Isn't it Terry Pratchett?
It's Terry Pratchett, you're right. Not Tad Williams. Tad Williams is...
I don't see him listed on... Oh, yeah, there it is. In more modern times, Terry Pratchett's Dickworld.
See, it doesn't
Terry Pratchett's Discworld.
Dickworld? Did you just say Dickworld?
I did say Dickworld.
I have not actually read...
So let's start that again.
Discworld.
So here it is, Terry Pratchett's Discworld.
I get so much shit for having not read Discworld. But
I'm sure we will if this ever gets popular.
Yeah. Sure. Like, if you want to go through another series that neither of us have touched, that's a prime ground there.
I mean, it is a potential. I know you've read Piers Anthony, right?
I like the Xanth books.
Are they comedy? Do you laugh while you're reading them?
I laugh when I'm reading everything.
Did you laugh? I mean, I know you laughed out loud at Amos.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You look like shit, Captain. I did laugh out loud.
Waiting there with two guns and fucking clips up like a bandolier of bullets. He's like, you look like shit. What?
See,
when did you become a walking armory?
So this one has me confused. Of course, this sounds like low fantasy to me, but they're calling it contemporary.
Xanth is something you should read with Henry as he gets middle schoolish.
Oh yeah.
It's not young adult so much so, but it does have a young adult feel to it. They're a little bit thicker. Because young adult, I don't really feel like it was an established thing at the time.
Well, yeah, it was called juvenile fantasy, which is also on here.
Motherfuckers.
But yeah, no, I guess...
Wait. I'm just calling it now. Before we go to juvenile fantasy, Last of Really Great Wang Doodles is going to be in there.
It could be.
I'm calling it now.
All right.
And that will instantly validate that for me. But right now, fuck that genre.
Contemporary. This is what I was saying. Contemporary fantasy. What's the difference between that and low fantasy? Because it says set in a modern world or based in a world of the contemporary era, but involving magic or other supernatural elements.
Oh shit! Dresden's not low fantasy. It's contemporary. Okay.
Is it? Well, let's click on it and see. C.S. Lewis. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
That's not modern. That's 60 years ago. No.
It was modern when it was written. He can't be in that movie. He died. No, I think urban fantasy is probably what Dresden's going to be under. But yeah, there's contemporary dark fantasy. We know what's in there. Dark Tower series.
Okay.
I bet you it's in there. But I'm curious to see what else they have. Let's see.
Nope, you just...
H.P. Lovecraft.
H.P. Lovecraft is listed here. He's got his own fucking subgenre out there, but they put him in this too?
Yeah,
come on!
He gets a lot of his own stuff. Peter Straub's Shadowland, which figures Peter Straub also worked with Stephen King on Talisman and I think the sequel. Yeah, H.P. Lovecraft.
Berserk? Really?
What is it?
Berserk.
Oh. Yeah, why not? That's not a dark fantasy? It has elements of horror.
Guess. I mean...
Attack on Titan definitely has elements of horror.
No. People eating people? Never. But
it's not people eating people. It's gigantic faceless Titans.
You didn't get very far, did you?
No, just season 1.
The Titans are people.
So you've spoiled this for me now. Thank you.
Congratulations. I haven't seen that far. They spoiled it for me and I stopped watching.
Yeah, I've only seen season 1. I'm gonna still keep watching.
To be fair to him though, I had time, and I didn't take advantage of it.
But yeah, obviously Stephen King's Dark Tower, which I was going to try to convince you to read on this channel at some point. Edgar Allan Poe.
Stupid. Again, when that was written, that was urban fantasy.
It's basically saying any story about a werewolf or a vampire could be described as dark fantasy. So Twilight is dark fantasy.
It's dark because it makes us all want to kill ourselves for all the wasted time we've spent reading or watching whatever pile of shit. What's her name? Stephanie Meyer or some crap? In fact, is that her name? If I've managed to remember her name properly, I have wasted my life.
Okay. I don't remember her name either, to be honest. But let's see. Extruded fantasy product.
Yeah, you know what? You know how good that is. That's Twilight. Derogatory term for derivative works. That's Twilight right there. And 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, and then
it's a fanfic of a fanfic. Yeah, that's extruded fantasy hardcore.
They went one further. They did.
It's Harry Potter.
They went one further. With 50 Shades. Then she started writing it from the male's or the guy's perspective. So she's deriving from her own derivative work. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
It's a derivation of a derivation.
Look.
All right, fables are stored.
Here's what I'm going to say.
What?
Right? I eat a pizza, and pizza is a finished, polished, delightful product. There's only one major derivative that comes out of it. And I'll be fucked if I'm going to take that derivative, reconsume it, and get another derivative of the last derivative. I'm not a rabbit.
Right. I'm sure people will be rewinding that to unpack what you
Good.
just said.
And you know exactly where I'm going with that.
Yes, I do.
I hope you had some fiber. Too much?
Alright. Fables.
That's fine.
I don't see how they're any different than fairy tales. But fables are stories with non-human characters leading to morals or lessons. Fairy tales themselves, as well as fairy tale fantasy, which draws on fairy tale themes.
I think the big difference there is supposed to be that fables are supposed to teach you something. Fairy tales do not necessarily have to. So your key difference is that a fairy tale does not necessarily need to give you something to walk away and ponder.
Mm.
Which is stupid, because if you're a reader and you're not pondering what you've read in any way, then why are you bothering?
A lot of these are pretty grim, to be honest. Especially the Hans.
Did you just try and fucking pun me? You point out a book of fucking fairy tales and say a lot of these are grim.
It's Hans Christian Andersen.
It doesn't matter.
But then I was
Did
gonna.
You know? Yeah,
I was gonna segue into grim.
I'm gonna punch you in the taint. Don't dad joke me here with bad puns.
It's my job. All right, so I don't even know why I'm looking at the computer screen when I can look at it up there. Fantastique.
Stupid.
Because it's French.
Supernatural elements. I'm sorry, we already looked at that with horror fantasy and dark fantasy.
Oh, I missed fantastic poetry.
Sure.
Okay, and this one I don't know. Fantasy of manners. Or manner punk.
That sounds so boring.
Focusing on matters of social standing or the way of comedy manners. But actually, before we move on to that, I'm kind of curious. Fantastique.
No, it doesn't fucking
Well,
matter.
I want to know what's under there. Like, what is a prime example of that? Aesop.
Aesop is all fables.
Notre Dame. Hunchback of Notre Dame. Is that fantasy?
It said passion play written by the guy who worked at the Notre Dame.
So not even any. I'm trying to find something that I would want to read here. So
go back up. You're passing it all.
Oh wait, where's the examples?
Well, if you wouldn't just jump through 800 fucking pages at a time.
Oh, here is the damn. Are we more likely to recognize these ones post World War II?
Sure. You're not going to look at any of them anyway. You're just going to scroll past them.
Richard Matheson claiming
Tolkien. Really?
Well, no, they're saying people that were influenced by it. Here, do you want to go back up? Which ones?
No. This whole subgenre. Garbage.
Okay, all right. We'll move on.
Hey, look, they named a psychologist. Even though he wasn't.
Yeah.
Notable authors.
Are any of those notable to you? Do you recognize
There's
any
like
of them?
15 different versions of Jacques in there.
And Jean-Louis Bouquet.
What you're telling me is that the French needed to feel special, and they got their own subgenre of fantasy.
Isn't the guy that wrote
Probably not.
Three Musketeers French?
Alexander Dumas, probably.
Oh, well, I guess it's not fantasy though, because technically, not.
Isn't that Alexander Dumas?
Yeah, it is, but I don't know if he's French.
Well, his S is silent. I got informed of that very pointedly when I was younger.
By who?
An English teacher.
Uh,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it wasn't supposed to be there. My bad. Hold on. Let me break out my pencil eraser.
Alright, so fantasy of manners. I don't know what.
Stupid. Social. It's a book written about social status. Like, fuck off.
Oscar Wilde. Oh, here's Alexandre Dumas. Dumas.
That is not. I've never seen a picture of him in my life. Holy shit.
He is French. I was right. Yes, I'm sophisticated in some way. Yeah, but he is French, but I guess he's not considered gas lamp fantasy. Using a Victorian...
That's called steampunk.
Or
Fuck
Edwardian... Off. No. Steampunk has machines. Gas lamp, I think, just takes place in a Victorian or Edwardian setting.
Okay, so when we don't have machinery, it's gas lamp, and when we do have machinery, it's...
Steampunk.
That's stupid.
Steampunk is also on here. Let's see. Gas lamp, gods and demons fiction. Shenmue. Involving gods and monsters from Chinese mythology. Any interest in that?
No.
The only most recent example, I guess, would be...
I guess Dresden isn't low fantasy.
No, it would be urban fantasy.
Well, no, but low fantasy right there, it says few supernatural elements. There are a lot of supernatural elements in Dresden.
Well, here's Grimdark. We all know what Grimdark is.
Never heard of it.
George R. R. Martin. And,
That's high fantasy.
well, no.
So just violent high fantasy?
Basically, yeah. And what's that other guy?
No,
Joe Abercrombie is like...
I know.
Yeah, Song of Ice and Fire.
Making a joke.
Joe Abercrombie.
Glenn Cook.
Steven Erickson. Steven Erickson?
Is old, yeah. Him and Esselmont have a series. It's pretty good.
What is it? Malazan?
Yeah.
But wait, so Erickson's version of Malazan is considered grimdark, but the other one's not?
Esselmonts should be. They're the same characters in the same world. Well, not the same characters, but mostly the same characters in the same world. He just wrote like the key stuff, and Esselmont wrote
Grimdark. Breaking Bad is grimdark, apparently, but it's
what?
Not fantasy though. Oh, it's saying an example of a grimdark fiction without the fantasy element is Breaking Bad.
This is all pointless and unnecessary.
What?
It's all fantasy. Some is more violent, some is more scary. Some takes place here, some takes place there. It's all fantasy. We don't need all the rest of this bullshit.
Alright, well, you know how there's high fantasy and low fantasy? Apparently there's hard fantasy, whose supernatural aspects are intended to be internally consistent and explainable. Named in analogy. I don't know why I can't say that word. Analogy. It's one of those words where, like, you know how to say it properly, but when you're trying to read it, your mind doesn't want to connect to it. So what do they think, like, hard fantasy is? Jules Verne?
Fuck off.
Is Lord of the Rings on there?
Yeah.
Where?
You see that big word that says examples, and then the following works have been called hard fantasy? The big, bolded, overly large examples?
I'm sorry. I guess Song of Ice and Fire makes sense, but King Killer Chronicle?
Fuck that guy.
for the same reason as George R. R. Martin?
No. Now he pissed me off even more. We don't have to get into that.
Yeah, well, another time.
Master of Five Magic.
Mistborn? I thought Mistborn...
That was in the 80s? I don't realize it was that old.
Is Mistborn... well, you would know better than me. I guess it follows strict rules.
Yeah. Tin always does this. Bronze always does that.
Okay, fair enough.
I would assume that that's what they mean by hard rules, like consistent. Heroic fantasy doesn't need to be its own genre.
But it's concerned, especially with the tales of heroes.
They're all. You can't.
Not everybody in a fantasy thing is a hero.
Yeah, because to have a hero, you need to have a villain.
Or you could have gray characters.
Yeah, cool. That's more realistic, but it doesn't. It doesn't.
High fantasy, we know that already. Epic fantasy, characterized by plot and themes on epic scale.
Historical fantasy. That's where 46% of America lives.
But in all seriousness, historical fiction with fantasy elements. Does that not deserve to be its own genre? Cause,
historical fantasy?
Yeah, I think.
No, I'm okay with that being its own genre.
Let's see what that entails.
Like, really? You don't have any historical fantasies? You've never read any of them?
I mean, like, I'm trying to think of what they consider. Though.
Did they just say gunpowder fantasy? But again, like,
we got Tales of the Janai. We got the Shaving of the Shagpat.
How is? Well, I guess maybe that's not fantasy. I guess maybe they consider that science fiction. Frankenstein should be in this list.
Frankenstein's not horror?
It's not fantasy. You just made a zombie. You made an intelligent zombie. That's not fantasy?
I thought it was...
I could see it being science fiction.
Science fiction, yeah.
But
yeah, I'm not seeing anything distinct here. Alternate history is what I'm thinking of when I was thinking of historical fiction. Let's see. Isekai. Isekai? So you're familiar with that then?
Yeah.
People transported from the real world to a different one.
It's a new subgenre because it needed to be its own genre too.
So we've never done this before? People transported from a real world to a different one?
Nope, Rip Van Winkle didn't exist. The guy that went
mainly in Japanese fiction. So,
it's not mainly.
So
not mainly at all.
So would
Dakota Kraut has a fucking 600 series written by 15 different people that make no sense as he goes through them all.
So Isekai.
Elon Musk made a computer game that sucked everyone in, and then the real world's getting destroyed while everyone's stuck living in the computer land.
So like Tron.
Yeah, kind of. But that's science fiction.
The most recent example of Isekai I can name is, didn't Squares do a game that failed miserably? Forsaken?
They've done a few. I never played Forsaken, so I don't know.
Well, I heard it didn't do well. But alright. Juvenile fantasy. Do we need to get into that?
Isekai, though, is easier if you go into anime. I don't know if you've done sword art.
Well, let's take a look.
It's when you're transported into another world from this one.
Knight's Magic. Spirited Away. Okay. That's the only one that I've seen. So,
RE0. Damn. Okay.
Super Mario Brothers.
No, but I don't think you get it. It's not based on Super Mario Brothers. Super Mario Brothers: The Great Mission to Rescue Princess Peach is actually the isekai based on Super Mario Brothers.
Well, I mean, from what I hear, the new movie does the same thing, where he's a human in Brooklyn and he gets transported to the Mushroom Kingdom.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Hacksign. You remember Hacksign?
I do.
That's isekai.
Yeah. Well, Spirited Away is probably the best example for me. That's the one I'm most familiar with.
Escaflowne was probably the first thing on that list I saw.
Peter Pan.
Well, Wizard of Oz.
Chronicles of Narnia.
How did I not think of Wizard of Oz? Of course, look, Narnia. You know, when you have 3 or 4 or 5 books that fall into every fucking subgenre, maybe you've done and made too many subgenres for the sake of making subgenres.
Well, I don't think they're not strictly followed. It's just something that people
But
like
then
to categorize.
it's unnecessary.
Eh, I still think it's fun
This
to
is
categorize
annoying
literary
me. This
genres.
is not fun. This is pissing me off.
Is it really?
It does. Fantastique literally only involves French people. There's not a single non-French guy in that subgenre. And given the time period, probably all guys too. So guess what? It doesn't fucking matter. It falls somewhere else. It's all it is fantasy of some sort or another, written by a French guy. It's not a subgenre.
I noticed that there's not
Fantasy of manners. It's fantasy around social class. Cool. Guess what? It's still just fantasy. If you don't have some kind of social structure in your world, then it's stupid, flat, and boring.
Well, I'm glad you're getting angry because there is a question I'm going to ask you at the end of all these, just to satisfy my curiosity. But lit RPG.
You completely skipped juvenile fantasy.
I did.
I need you to click that and see if Wang Doodles are on there.
Oh, okay. Wang Doodles.
If Wang Doodles doesn't make this list, Roald Dahl probably does. Aesop. Oh, look, Fables make the list. No, well, that makes sense. But still.
Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh!
Well, Wang Doodles would be under here, right? 1900 to 1945.
I don't know when she wrote it. Might be right after that.
Wind in the Willows. Let's just find your Wang Doodles so you don't get upset. I don't see
Where
it.
is she?
Starship Troopers. That's not. It might be late 20th century then.
There's Roald Dahl.
Wizard of Earthsea. The Owl Service. What the hell?
Anne McCaffrey. Really? That's really? Harry Potter is a stick of a pile of shit.
Yes. Yeah?
All of you can hear that. Fuck Harry Potter.
Yeah, I didn't see your Wang Doodles.
Can we just get this established now? Just for the sake of this, or anybody that does end up listening to everything that you do here. I'm going to do the hipsteriest, dumbest thing you can possibly hipster. Now, I hated Harry Potter before it was cool to hate Harry Potter.
Alright. I mean, I'll let you say that.
Is it not true? We argued in high school about how shit Harry Potter was.
I think that you have a unique reason for not liking it.
I
don't think anybody in the world will share that reason.
Yeah, well, it's not a basilisk. Fuck off.
Didn't I look up that a basilisk can either be a serpent or a lizard?
Person to do it. No.
All right, fine. All right. So there's juvenile fantasy. Aragon is in there as well.
That's barely a book.
What, Aragon?
That's barely coherent.
Well, that guy did write, Paulini did write a science fiction series, which is good.
I'm sure it's just as good as Aragon.
It is. No,
yeah.
It's better.
I hope so.
Let's see. Lit RPG, which is tabletop role-playing game. Low fantasy. Magic realism, a genre of literary fiction incorporating minor supernatural elements.
So low fantasy is characterized by few or non-intrusive. This is minor super. What's the fucking difference between few or non-intrusive and minor? What is the difference?
What are you gonna do if Chronicles of Narnia is under here too?
It can't be. That's high fantasy.
Is it?
It has. I mean, it's been on every other list so far, and we're past H.
I'm not seeing anything familiar here. 100 Years of Solitude, Plenitude.
Did it just say it's related to realism and surrealism? Did it just? So it's related to everything. They could take that apart and just say everything.
Yep, it did. Magical Girl
also
fantasy.
Doesn't need to be its own genre.
Well, Magical Girl?
Yeah, you just made No X Day by pointing that out.
Why did I make No X Day?
Because somewhere he got a little chill down his spine. He talked about his whole thing in life.
Involving young girls with magical powers. Mainly in Japanese fiction, apparently. Paranormal romance. Romantic fiction with supernatural or fantastic creatures.
Yep, this goes back to that derivative of the extruded fantasy.
Romantic fantasy.
Again, it's just fantasy. Oh, how dare our characters have some sort of relationship between each other?
Will Spencer's Tinker.
This is garbage. Should not be a subgenre.
Well,
if your characters don't have a relationship with other characters, then what's the point? Lock them in a box, in a room, close the door, and talk about how they spend their days pulling the light switch string and pulling the light to turn it off and take a nap, and then pull it to turn it back on, so they stare at the wall for a while. Like, if they're not interacting, and they don't, so relationships, but cool. So these are just more romantic and less platonic in nature. Fine, but guess what? It's still just fucking fantasy. I don't fucking care. This is unnecessary and stupid.
Honestly, like if I were to think of a romantic fantasy, like something that would fall within that wheelhouse, what comes to my mind is not even on there. What comes to my mind is not even on there. Princess Bride.
Yeah.
It's not even on the list.
No. It can't be.
Why?
Because it's got to be. It takes place in the real world. All the fantasy that happens is in the fake world. The book takes place in the real world as the grandfather talks to a little boy. So that's not even a fantasy genre. That's in a nonfiction section.
Okay.
No.
Science fantasy.
Dragon Riders.
Yeah, fantasy incorporating elements from science fiction such as advanced technology, aliens, and space.
Is going to run this.
Well, Star Wars is going to be probably the main thing in there, right?
Dragon Riders Pern.
Is it right there at the top? Oh, did you see it already or not?
No.
L. Ron Hubbard
is not an author. He's a sham human being.
Alright. Star Wars. Arthur C. Clarke. Star Trek.
Did they just name 3 science fiction things and be like, guess what, guys? They were really fantasy. Then what's the difference?
Dragon Riders of Pern, you said?
Should be on there. The whole series of Dragon Riders is of Pern, right?
Yeah, don't they travel to another planet that's a fantasy planet?
You don't even know that till like 18 books into the fucking series. The whole time you just think it's people in another world flying dragons, shooting worms out of the sky, like breathing fire on them so that they can continue living their lives. And then slowly they just start discovering old tech under ruins that they are excavating under an exploding volcano to find out that humanity settled here from space a long time ago, and the dragons were just lizards that they genetically engineered. But that's like 18 books later you find out that it's fucking science fiction the whole goddamn time.
Yeah, so then it's not technically science fantasy.
How's it not?
Because it was science fiction the whole time, and it tricked you
into thinking it was fantasy.
Yeah.
So it's science fantasy.
This is an actual mix.
No, it is a mix.
If they genetically modified and created a dragon, that's science fiction. It's only fantasy if it exists on its own.
The first 18 books, 17 books were fantasy. Ish.
I mean, Avatar. Avatar has dragon-ish things.
But they started. You don't know. In the very beginning, you don't have any idea whatsoever that she's going to tie this back to actually being like Earth settlers from space.
Yeah, I guess. Steampunk. There's your steampunk there.
Nope.
Genre, which is
gas lamp.
No, gas lamp doesn't have.
Nope, it's all the same.
Okay, fine.
Sword and sorcery. Oh man. Heroes in a fantasy setting using swords. Fuck out of here. That's not its own genre. Again, just fantasy. Urban fantasy. Fantasy set in a city. I fucking hope you don't have farmers. Like, what do you mean set in a city?
Well, do you want to see some other examples besides?
This Sanderson's fucking. Go ahead, keep going. Miss.
Well, I was gonna scroll down to the examples.
Yeah, Mistborn is. This is all Mistborn here. Should 100% be in here. Supernatural. Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Jim Butcher.
Because it's Chicago. Because it's always in Chicago, except that it's not. It's mostly in Chicago. Where is Sanderson? Glenn Cook. Garrett P.I. Okay.
I think it has to be a real city.
I read Glenn Cook and thought Black Company right away. I didn't even see that. It was a different series.
Magician's Trilogy.
Lev Grossman. I saw an X there. I was like, what? He didn't write a book. He just danced on a comedy screen for a couple of minutes. Lev.
I mean, this works. Neil Gaiman Neverwhere. Although, doesn't that take place in London?
Sure. So is Harry Potter.
So where's Sanderson? Sanderson's still high fantasy. It's not it's a city, but it's not a city. That didn't come out the way I wanted it to. It's a city, as in it's
not a real city.
It's not a real city.
I refuse to accept that as being the distinction.
That's so different from your entire tone so far. So.
Sanderson didn't make it. Okay.
So then we've established.
Stupid.
What? What did I just say? That's a person.
Haven't you heard of the Cat Rambo series? You just tie a headband on your cat and go
I would totally read that. Weird fiction. Macabre and unsettling stories from before the terms fantasy and horror were widely used.
So you're saying it's horror before they used horror? So... no. Just no.
Alright. I agree with you. That is kind of stupid.
It's still horror! Just because they didn't use the word yet.
Then, yeah.
Guess what? Then all horror is actually weird fiction. It's not horror. Because this is the original horror. The only difference is they weren't using horror yet. So then fuck the other genre, because it's all weird fiction. This is pointless.
It's outdated, I guess. Alright. And Zanzia. Probably not saying that right. Chinese martial arts fiction, often incorporating fantasy elements such as gods, fairies, demons, magical realms, and reincarnation.
Probably Shansha or something like that.
Shansha.
Wukong myth and stuff.
Aren't they making a game of Wukong?
Probably.
Let's see.
But again, to me, this is just... How's this different from fairy tales? These are just East Asian fairy tales instead. Whoop-de-doo. Fairy tales of a different flavor. Still fairy tales. Or, wait, gods, fairies, and demons? Wait, so it's gods and demons fiction? But from China. Oh, so it's gods and demons fiction. Or fairy tales. Because those both are other genres. So either, why did we get two genres over there for Western, and then Eastern just got crammed into one? Why did it get split? Or why isn't it part of those? What's the point? Why keep them separate?
I don't know.
Stupid. Again, stupid.
All right.
There's only actually like 4 actual subgenres here.
Yeah, so that was my final question. What would you consider of these has actual merit? I'm going to see if they match what mine.
I don't know, man. Most of these are stupid. And they overlap to a point where you're just being nitpicky when you sub-genre. Oh, wait. My horror involves gods. Your horror involves elves. So you're grimdark and I'm gods and demons. No, you're just fucking... You're pointless is what you're being. You're trying to be elitist with your literature, and it's stupid.
Alright, so I'm going to pick out the ones that I think...
Steampunk and Gaslight are the same thing to me. Science fantasy, I get it. Sure. high fantasy, sure. Dark fantasy, I don't understand how that's different from horror fiction. Fables and fairy tales, I will say, are the same damn thing to me, but I get the distinction. Maybe. Let's see. Bagsian, bullshit. Comic, bullshit. Contemporary, bullshit. Dark, fine, I guess. But then the next time I see horror, it's actually dark. Extruded, yeah, I mean, that absolutely exists, but bullshit. Fables and fairy tales, same thing. Fantastic poetry, fuck off. Fantastique, fuck off harder. Fantasy of manners, you just, no.
Manor punk is what it's called.
I don't give a shit what they want to call it. It's bullshit. Grimdark is legit. Hard fantasy.
I actually don't consider Grimdark to be legit, to be honest. That's not one I would pick, but keep going and I'll go through mine.
Fine. So here's the thing with Grimdark. It's just more violent. That's ultimately what when I hear somebody say Grimdark, I'm like, oh, so they're just violent and callous with their violence, and they're not targeted. Like, they're not predictably targeted. Cool, fine, whatever. I don't care. But so if you want to say it's not legit, then fine. I'm okay with that. It's still fantasy. It's just extra violent without some of the weird narrative protections for the main characters. Okay. Heroic fantasy. Fuck off. High fantasy is legit. Historical fantasy, fine. Isekai, no, fuck off. I like a lot of it, but no. Juvenile fantasy, well, Wang-Doodles run in there, so fuck off. Lit RPG, I play it, fuck off. You're not your own genre, you're just fantasy. Low fantasy, legit magic realism, fuck off. Gods and demons, fuck off. You know what I'm doing? I'm taking gods and demons, and I'm taking fairy tales, and I'm calling it all the one we couldn't pronounce. Shinsia? Something like that?
Yeah.
Magic Girl. No. Paranormal. No. Paranormal is dark. Or, well, I guess it doesn't even have to be dark, because it doesn't mean that the paranormal has to be scary. So yeah, no. Romantic fantasy. Again, fuck yourself. Science fantasy. Sure, I guess. Steampunk, I guess, is science fantasy then. Maybe not. No, there is a little bit of a distinction, but whatever. Sword and sorcery. That's basic fantasy. Get fucked. Urban fantasy. Oh, we're fantasy, but we're in a specific city. Get fucked. Weird fiction. That's all fantasy. Get fucked.
Alright. Let me do my take then. See how you feel then. Bagsian fantasy. Yeah, I'm on the same page with you. No. Comic fantasy, I will say, like a comedy fantasy, is a legitimate.
No. If you're not going to give me violence on Grimdark, then I'm not giving you, oh, they were a little humorous.
Fine. All right. I'll come halfway with you on that one. Contemporary fantasy, no. Dark fantasy, yes. I think that's a legitimate genre. It's horror fantasy. Fables, fairy tales, I agree with you. Those should be mixed. Gaslamp and steampunk should be mixed. You're right. Gods and demons.
It even calls out gods and demons involving gods and monsters of Chinese mythology. Xianxia, Chinese martial art. So it's just gods and demons doing kung fu. It's a difference. That's the difference in your genre. Fuck off. I didn't even catch that. I thought it was bleed over from like the next line down.
Yeah, grimdark. Like I said, I don't agree. Hard fantasy is no. High fantasy. Legit.
What about heroic fantasy?
No, that's not legit. Like I said, dark fantasy is like specifically horror and fantasy. I think is legit. Low fantasy and urban fantasy are the same thing as far as I'm concerned. And magic realism could go in there,
especially because urban fantasies only seem to be the things they called out only seem to be real world cities. Then yeah, like, what?
Yeah, magical girl. I don't know about that.
Sailor Moon.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. Or like again, Madoka. I don't know if you've watched any Madoka.
No, I haven't.
It's just
Romantic fantasy / no. Science fantasy. Star Wars is big enough that it fits under there. Star Wars is the only
fiction.
science fantasy I can do.
It's science fiction.
It's not.
Yes, it is.
The Force was what? The Force and
he midi-chlorianed it.
Well, they still. It's
that makes it science fiction.
All the midi-chlorians are is just a bridge between humanity and still this mystical
Genetic.
force. So.
Okay, well then the molecules and everything that you think about don't exist because they're fantasy.
Fine. Steampunk is legit. Sword and sorcery, legit.
No! That's...
I'm kidding. Nah, you're right. Urban fantasy, part of low fantasy. Weird fiction, part of dark fantasy. Sanja. No.
I didn't... The only difference is martial arts. What the... Read them! That's it. The 100%. That's the difference.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. This was a little. It's got a little bit more heated, but I think fun than I intended. We may check out fantasy or science fiction and horror subgenres next. But yeah, interesting take, an interesting experiment here on podcast just to see what we agree with what they've come up with. But yeah, join us for next time, and our next podcast should be wrapping up the end of the Expanse series, Leviathan Wakes.